Là, je suis vraiment content que nous présentions ensemble celui qui m'a fait basculer là-dedans. Je dois beaucoup à Jacques, mais celui qui m'a vraiment fait basculer corps et âme dans le monde delphinien, celui qui avait une approche non pas scientifique, et finalement peut-être scientifique au fond, mais alors une science nouvelle qui est en train d'émerger très lentement, c'est Jim Nollman, l'homme qui organisait les grands concerts avec les orques sauvages dans les eaux glacées du large de Seattle ou des comment s'appellent les îles où il habite déjà
là-bas.
Ouais, là-bas.
Moi, I want to say something to Jim, so I say it in English, okay? Because you don't have a helmet. Something Jim Nollman teach me, something very wonderful and very deep. It's he used to say to me a lot, yeah, okay, it's for sure we can learn a lot about dolphins and whales, but you know, you can learn the same thing with a flower or with I don't know in English, un ver de terre. Et je crois que c'est très vrai. Et j'enchaîne sur une phrase de Patrice qui me dit, pour finir, ben, le message des dauphins, on peut l'apprendre de plusieurs manières. Mais chez certains d'entre nous, dont moi, qui était spécialement endormi, je prétends pas que je suis complètement éveillé non plus, ben, il m'a fallu vraiment le dauphin. Parce que celui qui ne se fait pas réveiller par le dauphin, eh ben...
Celui-là, oui. Sinon, on se demande ce qui va le réveiller.
Je ne sais pas ce qui va lui arriver.
Oui.
Donc pour moi, c'est ça. C'est Jim qui disait, oui, d'accord, il faut se connecter au dauphin, ok, mais peut-être encore plus avec les vers de terre. Et c'est aussi dans ce même ordre de choses qu'on a invité hier Bernard Werber. Pour finir, j'ai oublié d'en parler comme ça. Et c'est ça, moi, je crois que c'est important.
En France, on dit Werber, on ne dit pas Werber.
Mais on est en Belgique ici, non?
Ah oui, c'est vrai.
Alors, enfin voilà, je vous présente Jim Nollman.
Hi.
Hello. Hello.
I'm going to open up a computer here, and something different is supposed to happen. So here goes. It will happen.
Did it happen yet?
I was lying in bed last night thinking about two words. They were perception and language. And I was thinking about them in terms of which came first, the chicken or the egg. And does perception create language? In other words, the way we as human beings see the world, does that make our language? Or is it vice versa? Do we split up into all our tribes several thousand years ago and go off into France or San Juan Island or... Oh, look. I was very reticent about using a computer on screen because they never work for me. You see, we have a hiss here, and now it's gone. So the idea of perception and language, for example, I've been to France several times, but I've never really talked to French people except people taking my ticket at the Louvre. And this is the first time, and listening to the language, I really understand the sensuality of the French language and have been observing and wondering about the sensuality, the famous sensuality of the French people. and I've only been wondering. So French is the language of love. Does it mean that the French people are loving? Well, maybe they are. The love that I see and hear in the French language is a sensual love. The kind of love that we, in English, there's another language, have for love. I actually think in terms of the Tibetan language, where there's an unconditional love. And the French use of the love in the language also produces some negative effects. Now, I'm not picking on the French, because wait till I get into the Americans in another minute. I went into the drugstore to buy some toothpaste, and I only spoke English, and the man selling the toothpaste did not want to talk to me because I didn't speak French, and I realized that the same love he has for the language and the sensuality, he wasn't able to share with me. So what is the other side of sensual love? It's possessiveness, and it's throwing away. I'll use another example. As I say, I don't want to pick on the French, because actually I'm going to talk to you about petroglyphs in Wales in a minute. But this is a very important background. What? In Japan, the language is based on courtesy. There are levels of courtesy, so that a 10-year-old boy speaking to an elder would use a completely different set of words to say the exact same thing that the elder would in return say to the little boy. And this levels of courtesy, nearly Baroque, Rococo courtesy, also produces a nation that has a reputation internationally for disrespect for nature. And I realized that this very deep-seated courtesy only applies to human beings. And in order, if it's true that perception and language have this relationship, probably the best way to change the Japanese opinion of nature is to help them change their language. And I'm not going to really tell you why, because I have a cop-out here. And that is that I'm not a scientist, and I'm going to use this as a cop-out. A scientist would, oh, look what happened. A scientist would ask the question that you saw on the first slide, and then would spend the rest of the slide presentation giving the answer, because if you had to condense science into 2 sentences, science is about asking questions or learning to ask questions and then providing the answer. And I'm not sure that a scientist would agree with me that if they didn't answer the question, they had failed. But in our 20th century craziness, science has been manipulated so that mystery has disappeared, because science is somewhat controlling the question and the answer. And in a world where there are only answers to question, it's the death of mystery. Now, I come from a different tradition, which is the art tradition. My mentors are John Cage and Picasso, and my favorite, the French playwright Eugene Ionesco, who I believe is actually Romanian and absurd. Now, the artist would ask the question, and the problem with 20th century art has been that they would ask the question and then not provide the answer. And it's almost as if they did provide the answer, their art would not be on such a high plane. And the problem I find with this is that by not providing the answer, or some semblance of an answer, they're disrespectful of their audience. And it's almost as if the art tradition that was produced in New York and in Paris from the 1920s to the 1950s was only for a very select and elite audience. And the problem I have with that is artists traditionally are the people who change perception, in Western tradition at least. Now, we really need to change perception. We really need to have a different perception of nature. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. And my problem with the art tradition is, where are the artists when we need them? They're certainly not doing that because they're not being respectful of the community. So now I've told you I have a problem with the 20th century scientific tradition, which I think is compulsively providing answers and condensing animals or nature into numbers, measuring. Measuring becomes the measure of their measure, which may not be translatable. This is all background, because what I'm going to do is tell you about another tradition and another time, many thousands of years ago, when something very wonderful was happening in both the arts and the sciences. We don't really think of the arts and the sciences from thousands of years ago. In fact, the artist and the scientist were the same person. And this is the tradition that I, in my own life, am trying to relearn, because I think it's somehow both of these professions have so much value for our own future into the next millennium, and that only by combining this two traditions into one tradition again do we have any hope of survival. What I want to talk to you about today is basically what Patricia just showed you in the film, but going into a little deeper perspective of some of the particulars of it, and talking about the European tradition of relating to whales, which here we are in iSearch and everybody has a good feeling about the whales. Well, where did it start in Europe? And where it actually started was in the northern Ural Mountains. And the people were the Finnish people. They migrated west, and I think some of them even migrated south into a place called Tuva. Some of you probably heard overtone singing from Tuva. I can't do it, but you get the idea. The Sami people, the Laplanders from northern Finland, still do this, which to me suggests that there was a link so long ago. When the Finnish people migrated west into the north-central Europe, they split into their tribes. Some went south and became the Hungarians, and some went north and became the Finns, and some went north and east and became the Karelians, or the Karelian Finns. What they did is they settled on very large lakes and on the seacoast. The time I'm talking about is about 4000 BC, when I don't know what was happening. Egypt was just starting. They started doing art. Now this is an obvious one. What I want to do here, hopefully, is to give you an understanding of these petroglyphs, because they've very deeply affected me, because I think they exemplify this place where the art and the science come together. So I'm going to start with a simple one. Now this is pretty obvious what this one is. The way these were made is they were chipped out of very hard rock with some other hard rock, and most of them are silhouettes. They're profiles, and they're maybe less than 1/2 centimeter deep into the rock. Okay, you get that one. Now you just saw a hunting of the beluga whale, and I noticed some people holding their eyes, which is the power of the modern technology. But here's basically the same thing. I don't see anybody turning away. One of the interesting things about this particular one is it's the oldest representation that I know of somebody skiing. So these people did have a basic technology, and I love this guy. He looks like what I've always thought somebody that was going to save Snow White. When Snow White escapes the wicked queen, this is the guy she wants to meet out in the woods, even though he's hunting the moose. The place we were in Russia, where you saw in Patricia's film, what their people are eating there mostly now is potatoes. But you know, potatoes come from Peru, and they were actually brought back to Europe in the middle of the 16th century by some of the people who were with Pizarro, the Spanish conquistador. So this is the supermarket. This is what they had. And I tell you this, but I also want to say this very forcefully. In the film, it's stated who can criticize, who was able to criticize the killing of the beluga whale. And I tell you, I will criticize that anywhere. And I will criticize it to the Inuit's face. And I've done it, and it's got me in big trouble, but I feel that this is our best chance at meeting E.T. Okay, you get that one too. Now this is a really interesting petroglyph for me. It's the original family portrait. You get the guy, I don't know who made this. I mean, let's look at this. Who made it? Did the woman, the pregnant woman make it? I mean, we're talking about a time when the goddess was ruling the cultures of Europe. This is before the patriarchy of the Middle East came into ascendancy. So who made this? Did the pregnant woman make it? Or did the guy with the giant spear and the giant penis make it? If the guy made it, you can really tell he's really proud of something here. I love that little lag between speaking and having the laughter come. The two little things in front of the guy, see, it happened again. I believe those are footprints. Now I want to tell you something. I'm going to give you this explanation of the petroglyphs, but I don't know anything about them. And there's a famous American poet named Charles Olson who studied Mayan hieroglyphs back in the 1950s. And he said the beauty of the Mayan hieroglyphs is that they're so complex and nobody knows anything of what they mean, so it's the best ground of all for poets, because you can say anything you want about them and everything is true. One of the things I noticed when I brought this petroglyph into Photoshop that I hadn't seen in the original photograph was the lines that are connecting the man and the woman. What it suggests to me is that these people had an understanding of some kind of energy to the point that they were actually able to put it graphically, and it was as important in some ways as the spear and the penis and the unborn baby. This is a petroglyph from Sweden. The little man you saw in Patrice's film was the Russian, the world's most famous petroglyph expert. He works in the Hermitage. And his theory is that there's a certain line in the petroglyphs. The older petroglyphs show people as sticks because the human being had no sense of individuality yet. They didn't know that they were something apart from nature. And it was interesting because he said they were like animals. And I thought, I didn't agree with that because I think the animals do have a sense of individuality. And you've heard two of my favorite scientists in the world give presentations at this conference. Paul Spong, who is studying the individuality of the orcas and coming to the conclusion that the thing that is most special, the greatest lesson from these teachers who are the orcas, is their sense of family. And that this, in fact, could be a prototype for how we design families into the next millennium or into the future. I don't want to get too grand with that term. So here's a petroglyph that's saying that there was a time when human beings had no sense of individuality. So I don't really agree with this theory because I do believe that there are whales and other species. Well, I almost think flowers also have a sense of individuality, quite honestly, but that's stretching it, but I'll say it. My other favorite biologist is Dan Salden, who gave you this scene and film of a funeral at sea and talked about, this was when the one whale was going underneath it. It was a kind of an honoring of the death. Now this is another wonderful image. These things do not exist when animals are objects. And the sense that these animals are not objects, it seems so obvious, but science is telling us how to perceive the world. This is the discipline that we've given ourselves in the century that's about to end, to tell the rest of us what the animals are, what they're doing. And now this is changing. The fact that the orcas are all named now, I consider one of the great advances of 20th century biology. Only because now they all have names and they're individuals and we can think of them as people. So there's a boat. I don't know how big the boat is. I would venture a guess that it's at least 30 meters. This is a petroglyph from Sweden. It looks like there's a cover over the boat. Okay, now here is, according to Stoljar, this is a later petroglyph. Because you've got people here. You can see their noses, you can see their tools. Some are sitting, some are kneeling. There's one other thing I want to bring out in this one. I also believe there are some women in this. And most of the Russian interpretations, except from the Estonian man Väinö Poikolainen, talk about the men doing this and the men doing that, and when you see a woman, it's a woman with a baby inside. But I believe that there could be some women here, and there's no reason that that wouldn't be true. And look at the front of the boat with the figurehead. Stoljar told me that this is an initiation ceremony. That there are two adults in the front of the boat, and there are two adults in the rear of the boat. And the people in the middle are children, and they're going out to be initiated. It's just like the boy shooting the beluga whale until it was made into Swiss cheese. One of the aspects of this particular petroglyph that attracts the professionals is the fact that the line on the harpoon is dynamic, it's moving. There's another petroglyph that's on the shores of Lake Onega, which is 2 inches underwater, and it's of a snake. And you can only, when you see this petroglyph, because the waves are coming back and forth at a certain time of day, the snake is moving. And it's the first animated cartoon. This snake does move. And the person who explained this to me said, can you imagine the power that the artist must have had in his culture to carve something in rock and have it move? This particular petroglyph is about 10 feet from the snake. And what it shows is a human being taking the form of a reindeer. The thing that was so special about these people, we call them shamans. Now the shaman was the artist and the scientist together. One of the problems I've always had with definitions of shamanism, especially by American anthropologists, is they always talk about it in terms of the wounded healer, as if the shaman was some kind of crazy guy. I don't see how that's possible, because I've known Native American people who are considered shaman, and they seem extremely sane and grounded to me. And I wonder if it's just a Western preconception that somehow these people had to have been wounded to be able to talk to nature. And maybe the people who are studying them need to take off their glasses through the filter of their own anthropology. The idea was that there was a balance between earth and heaven, and between nature and the human community, and that the shaman's job was to keep the balance intact. There are stories that I learned working with beluga whales up in the Mackenzie Delta of northern Canada, where the Inuvialuit people live, that when they went out to hunt the beluga whale traditionally, the hunter would fast for 5 days. And even more striking is if they did kill a beluga whale and they would bring it back, they were not allowed to have a knife in sight for 2 days after that, and the beluga whale would sit there on the beach. And they weren't allowed to speak loudly. If they did, the ghost of the beluga whale would be insulted and go and tell the living belugas to stay away from that tribe because they had no respect. And the idea was, if the respect was shown, that the beluga whale might be reborn as a villager. And in fact, there was this circle. If I was the king of the world, I would allow certain native hunting of animals, but only if the people were completely dependent on it and living in the traditional way with these kinds of stipulations and laws. In a world where there is a supermarket and there are tomatoes on Baffin Island, I would say that we need to reassess the killing of beluga whales before they're all gone. In these areas, the beluga whale is considered an endangered or threatened species. This is my favorite petroglyph. Look at it closely. You probably don't see much of anything there. I did a concert in Helsinki 3 years ago, and the poster for the concert showed this petroglyph, and it struck me so strongly because it was so close to the kind of work I've done with orcas and pilot whales and humpback whales for 25 years. Now, what I want to show you here is how to look at a petroglyph. This is the original petroglyph in a very bad location. This particular petroglyph was discovered in the 1930s. It was put into a book by the man who discovered it and then lost forever, supposedly. When we went to Russia last summer, we went to find this petroglyph and invited this Estonian man who reminded me of the great wise man Yoda from Star Wars, Vaino Poikalainen, one of the wisest people I've ever met. And he took us right there, and we couldn't see almost nothing. It looked like that. Now, the problem with this is that this was badly preserved in the first place, but also the petroglyphs that you saw in the pictures in Patricia's film had all been cleaned up. And this is not in good condition to start with, but it's covered with moss. It's also being projected from a computer screen to a video screen, which also makes it not so good. But anyway, there it is. And I want you to pay attention to the crack in the rock. Let's take a look at it a minute. Okay, I can see it. Let's look at it a little differently. There are several ways to clean up a petroglyph. If you're in a hurry, you would use acid, or you would use an herbicide, and you would scrub it and get it clean. Vaino said the best way is to get into the time, the duration of the original carvers. And he suggested putting black plastic over it for a year and weighting it with stones and then just coming back after 1 year. Okay, there it is after a year. Can you see the whale? And there's something down here, and there's something over in the corner there. And also still notice the crack here. The way that professionals prefer to look at petroglyphs is to go out after dark and hold a flashlight at a very oblique angle so it highlights the shadows. And there it is. This was the poster that was used in the concert I did in Helsinki. I consider this petroglyph the theme and the dream and the hope that would bring anybody to an iSearch conference. Okay, now we're going to do something. What the professionals also do is they then go in and use watercolors or chalk to be able to look at it better. Unfortunately, in the original, it looks much clearer now, but this is the problem of the projection. So I'm going to go right on here. There it is. So what do we have here? When I first saw this, I asked some of the professional archaeologists what it was. And I was told it was an unidentified warrior killing an unidentified sea mammal. I think that, I don't mean to disparage the person who made this, but I think that nobody really ever looked at it closely before. Well, there's the thing behind it. In fact, this is an anatomically precise beluga whale. It has the rostrum. It's not a fish. It's certainly not a seal. You know, I'm going to digress a second. When I met Professor Belkovich, the man who was doing the video with the beluga whales, his assistant took me aside and he said, you know what's the best cartoon that we show them? It's Casper the Friendly Ghost. This is a very interesting part of it for me. So what do we have here? This is the unidentified warrior. I think it's a woman. I also think she's giving birth to a whale. You saw the penis in the other picture, and I don't think, they just didn't look like that in any of the other petroglyphs. This is why. Also the fact that the woman's legs are spread so open. There's one other reason too. When I was living with the Inuvialuit on the Mackenzie Delta, they told me the story of the invention of war among human beings. It goes something like this: that a woman married a whale and gave birth. And when the baby was born, she put it into a thimble. I don't know, does the translator know this word, thimble? Thimble's what you use for sewing, and you put it on your finger. It's made out of metal so you don't stick yourself. So she put the whale into a thimble, but it grew very quickly. So then she put it into a pail, a bucket. But it still grew quickly, so she put it into a pond. But it was a big whale, and it kept on growing, and so she put it back into the ocean. And all the people in her tribe considered the whale to be their brother and their family. And some strangers came there and saw the whale in the water and looked at it as a whale, and came when the people said, no, no, this is our brother. The other people came at night and killed the whale because they only saw it as a whale. And this was the invention of war among the human beings. These are sticks. They're made out of a desert wood from Baja, California. But they're nearly identical to sticks used by the Australian Aboriginal people from Groot Island and Mornington Island in northern Australia. And they use them in the water, and that makes the sound. And the dolphins come in and bring the people in the tribe fish. And it's a cooperative fishing behavior. It's interesting because I read an interview with the shaman of the tribe once about the fact that he was using these to call the dolphins in. And he said, no, I'm not using these to call the dolphins at all. I'm using them to settle my own mind so that I can be prepared to make the connection with the dolphin telepathically. Another interesting thing about these sticks is that Jacques Cousteau made a film in the early 1970s of the Imaragan people in Mauritania who are also beating the water and attracting dolphins, and the same thing was going on. So who can say that those aren't sticks? I mean, I made these 20 years ago, and they're even One thing I promised myself I wouldn't do today is try to be too forceful with my proofs, because I don't know. I wanted to make it a little more explicit so you could really see what I believe is going on here. Now the question remains, is the woman in the water or is she on the land? I think the crescent is a moon symbol, and it's a universal, international, and cuts across time from the Egyptians to today as being a symbol of woman. Even the other one of the family portrait had the same crescent beside the woman. Now, the other object in there is the thing that was called the spear or the harpoon. Maybe so, but maybe it's not a spear. Isn't that strange? I have to explain this. I thought I could go very different ways with this. I could tell you that this is actually from the Karelian language, but that would be a lie. And then I thought I could say it was something from Aleister Crowley or something from Madame Blavatsky, some kind of a charm that was used to attract beluga whales, and that's what the arrow is signifying. But in fact, what's really going on is that I made this presentation with a special font, and the W shows a woman like this, and the Q shows her going like this, and she's dancing. But I forgot to put the font into the zip disk. Maybe the arrow is signifying movement in music. If it is, I'm going out on a limb here now. That's another font that's supposed to be a telephone. If it is, if it's movement and she's dancing and there's song or chant going on, then it would clearly suggest communication. So you have to wonder, if it's communication, what are they saying? We're back to the myth of how war started among the human beings and how the woman gave birth to the beluga whale. Now, some of you know me that I communicate or try to communicate or play music with different whale species, so I have to have some idea what the beluga whale would be saying. I don't have a clue. What I do think, and the main thing that came out of this for me, is this is an expression of a sacred and shamanic relationship between a beluga whale and a woman. Patrice wrote the book. It wasn't until today. I always thought Rev. Is that how you pronounce it? See how disrespectful I am of French? I really wish I could speak it. And when I speak in Japan, I really wish I could speak Japanese. It's such a waste. Huh? I thought Rev mean laugh. It was the fifth laugh. And it sounded so mysterious to me. So now I know that it doesn't mean that. Okay, so is the woman underwater? And if she is, what kind of a prototype is that? This is on either side of me when I've been selling my tapes downstairs. There has been people signing up people to go on dolphin swims. So this is the first dolphin swim. It's the oldest example, petroglyph, picture of a dolphin swim. I've done something similar. I'm not much of a swimmer, as you can see in this. This is a project that I did. I'm going to digress a little. I think I need to introduce myself a little, and I waited a long time, so bear with me here. This is a photograph from a really long time ago. In 1976, I was commissioned by the state of California. They wanted to promote the gray whales. This was just when the whales were becoming something in the media. So the guys in the Zodiac there are dropping a radio transmitter, an AM radio, into the water. And the idea is that the gray whales would be swimming past and I would be attracting them using this drum. It's almost identical to the drum you saw me playing in the film earlier, but it's much larger. And that people would drive down the coast of California and turn on their radios and they would hear the gray whales. But the project promoters made a fatal mistake, and that is that the gray whales make almost no sound. That the orcas didn't ordinarily come close to. They came in the vicinity, certainly. And we projected music entirely at night. There was much too much boat noise during the day. And we invited children and Tibetan lamas and maybe 500 people over that time to come out there and basically just let them sit on the boat. And if anybody had a good idea about how to communicate with the orca, we would just turn on the microphone or plug in their instrument. The point being that I don't think anybody has a clue of how to proceed in this idea of communicating with animals better than anybody else. And that if the orcas are bringing their babies around to interact with us, or to come close to us at least, we should have our babies there singing back to them. So we did this for years. I've also been doing a project in Southeast Alaska in a place where the humpbacks make very little sound. The sound that you hear on all the music tapes is really made in the tropics, mostly, almost entirely, and the idea is that it's the males courting the females. In Southeast Alaska, which is the place they go in the summertime, they're feeding almost 24 hours a day unless they're sleeping. And we wanted to see if we could somehow, I was working with a marine biologist named Fred Sharp, to see if there was, if we could elicit the kind of sounds that they were making in the tropics up in Southeast Alaska, and we actually did succeed. But as another digression, the best results I ever had with that was working with iSearch in Japan, where I was working with a Mongolian overtone singer, a distant relative to the Karelian Finns, and attracted a female humpback and her baby to the boat. And the female, which I don't know if even females are supposed to sing, and it did sing with us for well over an hour. I want to say one other thing, though, right here, and that is I don't feel that I have any special talent at this work. I don't even feel especially a talented musician, and I'm certainly not the Pied Piper. But what I do is I do it, and I've been going out and trying this thing, and I'm not even certain what it is, which is another one of the artistic cop-outs that I fall into, being a 20th century artist myself, which is to just do it and hope for the best. And one thing I've learned, and where I've drifted away from the tradition of this cop-out kind of art, is that there is a great value to it, because especially in Japan, we can attract lots of media, and it's been very helpful to establishing whale watching sites at places where there were once, even very recently, were whaling stations. And that's some of our hidden agenda also, to work with the belugas on the White Sea. In fact, one of the great ironies of the White Sea belugas, Patricia told you when she showed you the footage of Hudson Bay, that they used to, the oceanariums used to go there to catch their belugas. Well, ecotourism became so successful there that Hudson Bay didn't want the oceanariums there anymore. And it was the end of captivity. So the Canadian oceanariums and the United States oceanariums are now looking at... Oh yeah, I told the translator to say that. The oceanariums are now going to Karelia, and the first Russian beluga whales from the White Sea were caught this August and September for shipment to Niagara Falls near Toronto in Canada. And we believe that by starting getting people from Europe to know about this place and to want to visit it is to save these whales, because there's no economy in Russia now. The Russian system under the Soviets was based on slavery, enslaving Eastern Europe, and now that they don't have that, and that entire system is gone, they can't quite figure out how to live in the world and to join the money economy. So in Karelia, they have already caught beluga whales. And I have an overt plea to you, is that if any of you would like to help that, just go there and pay a few rubles to the locals to take you out there. And it may be protect those whales better than any kind of protest or anything like that. Pretty good, huh? That's where I live. I just wanted to give you some perspective. I live on an island which is in Puget Sound, midway between Vancouver and Seattle, which actually has one of the largest orca populations in North America. And there they are, the lovely little orcas. We're still in the water now with the woman, okay? Let's go back and get our bearings here, our context. I jumped into the into the water with the orcas for 2 years, two summers, and I really didn't like it very much. It was, I'm not much of a swimmer, and my interest is really in, I wanted a telephone line to the whales. I wanted to hear them and to be able to respond to them and have them respond to me. And jumping into the water like this was a stunt, but it did serve one purpose. This is nearly 25 years ago, and in those days nobody knew what an orca was. It was a killer whale. And some of us knew that they weren't dangerous, but jumping in the water had served a certain purpose on American television for a little while. But I never thought it was anything to pursue. Okay, let's put the woman back on the shore again. Maybe she isn't in the water. Maybe the beluga whale is spy hopping over the crack in the rock. And maybe the crack in the rock was there when the carver made the original petroglyph. So I also started working on land, or off of boats, in the air. Let's call it in the air. This is off of a boat in southeast Alaska with the humpbacks. It's fairly easy to do it. You put some good sound and the whales will come around usually, and they'll stay sometimes so long that you don't know what to do anymore. You go down and have dinner and come back and they're still hanging around. And I wish I knew more what to say to them sometimes. The thing that seems to work best, and this is really crazy, after so many years of doing it, we've had classical musicians, we've had reggae musicians, we've had every kind of musician you can imagine. People getting so excited that they forget how to play even. The thing that works best is when the musicians are having a good time.
Translator asked, what is a piper? Piper.
Is a man who attracts people by playing.
Oh, the Pied Piper? Yeah. The Pied Piper of Hamelin. It's a. Don't you have that? Who attracts all the mice and then the townspeople don't pay him? Okay, I'm not him. So then he takes all the children and he takes them away forever, except for the little boy who's lame, who can't keep up with them. I was up in northern Vancouver Island 3 weeks ago, starting to regroup with the orcas with some new equipment and made some new tapes, which for me were very exciting with this. And I wanted to play an excerpt of it. This is pretty much the way that we were working. But this is a posed photograph, I'll be quite honest, because we did work mostly at night. But it's basically this kind of thing. Now I'm going to play this this tape in 1 second though. Chotto mate kudasai. Okay, you can turn it on. That was really exciting. I started playing bottleneck blues with the